The Great Depression was a difficult time for American society. Due to the economic crisis, many entrepreneurs lost their businesses, and workers were completely deprived of the opportunity to feed their families. The lack of legal ways to improve their lives forced people to join gangs and get money in less than legal ways. It is also impossible not to note the fact that most of the masses blamed banks for their troubles, as well as other credit and financial statements. They believed that Wall Street tycoons and people like them were profiting from the misfortune of ordinary citizens. That is why criminals such as John Dillinger quickly gained popularity and turned into the people's avengers. After all, the logic here is simple: Dillinger robbed more than 20 banks, which means he went against the system, which means he belongs to him, which means he is for the people. Even today, most Americans can easily answer your question. Who is John Dillinger? But at the same time they will not be able to name the first 5 candidates. Let's take a closer look at the life of this man, and also find out how his story ended. John Herbert Dillinger was born in Indianapolis, Indiana, in the family of John Will Dillinger and Mary Lancaster. The family also included John's older sister, Audrey. My father owned a grocery store and made good money. And Mary spent most of her time raising the children and doing housework. It seemed that everything was going well, but when the boy was only 3 years old, his mother died, and his father became very angry and often took it out on the children. In addition, John Dillinger Sr. sold his store and moved his family to a small, unremarkable town. John did not like to go to school, and many biographers note that he was a rather rude and even angry child. He often took money from classmates, beat up local punks, and also engaged in petty theft. Already at the age of 16, John decided to quit school and got a job in Indianapolis, but in 1923 he was first arrested by the police. The reason for this was the theft of a car, and as it later turned out, John stole it to impress a girl he really liked. To avoid punishment, young Dillinger escapes from arrest and enlists in the U.S. Navy. It seemed that fate had given him the opportunity to start life from scratch, but the hardships of service weighed on the freedom-loving John, and 5 months later he escaped from the army and returned to his hometown. In 1924, John found an attractive 16-year-old girl, and a short time later he married her, but they failed to establish family life. The thing is that the newlyweds did not have their own home, as well as work, which is why Dillinger returns to petty crime. For some time he got away with it, but one day law enforcement officers managed to arrest him for stealing his neighbor's chickens. Fortunately for John, the case did not go to trial, as his father was able to settle the situation, but one way or another, John was unable to find a good job and his family was falling apart due to financial difficulties. Seeing no prospects in life, Dillinger decides to rob a store together with his friend Ed Singleton. In general, everything went well, but during the raid there was a local priest in the store, who identified the robbers and told the police about it. The very next day, law enforcement officers arrested the young robbers and took them to the station. Ed Singleton denied his guilt, but John, on the contrary, cooperated with the investigation and admitted to his crime. As a result, the court ordered a sentence of 10 years in prison for Dillinger and 5 years in prison for Singleton. This deepened John's disdain for the justice system in the country. By the way, the deal with the police that John agreed to promised a suspended sentence, and such a deception made the guy very angry. When they brought him to prison, he said the following: "When I leave here, I will become the meanest bastard you have ever seen." And to some extent, this phrase was prophetic. While in prison, John Dillinger did not waste his time. He communicated a lot with experienced bank robbers, as well as criminals of other stripes. They helped John develop his criminal skills, and in general gave him many ideas that will be implemented in the future. In addition, Dillinger created and rethought his plans. By the way, at the same time, John's father did not sit idly by and constantly tried to help his son. Thanks to his petition, Dillinger Jr. was able to be released early from prison. For several months he was a law-abiding citizen. But already on September 22, 1933, everything returned to normal. On this day, John Dillinger and his comrades rob a bank in Newcastle, Ohio, and his jackpot exceeds $10,000, which at that time was a very serious amount. And here it should be noted that Dillinger acted clearly, quickly and decisively. According to eyewitnesses, the bandits did everything so smoothly that it seemed they had been doing this all their lives. John was not going to stop there, just like his accomplices. In just 4 months, the gang robbed 5 more banks, and the amounts of money they took with them were quite large. However, one day Dillinger's luck ran out and he was captured by the police and taken to Ohio State Prison. At that moment, John was very calm and even relaxed, which caused genuine surprise among the police. The whole point is that while Dillinger was free, he managed to smuggle weapons, ammunition, and money to his friends who were in Michigan State Prison. Thanks to such a significant arsenal, the prisoners were able to escape from prison and went to the aid of John Dillinger. By the way, among the fugitives there were quite a lot of characters already known to the general public, for example, Pierpoint, Charlie McGee, and Russell Clark, a very young but truly dangerous criminal. The trio arrived at the Ohio State Prison, introduced themselves as police officers, and then demanded a meeting with John Dillinger. But the local sheriff did not believe the criminals' words and demanded papers that would confirm the identities of the newly hired police officers. Pierpoint, not at a loss, pulled out a pistol and said, "Here they are." After which he fired at the sheriff, found the key to the cell and freed John. Then the group jumped out through the back door and disappeared in a pre-prepared car. Of course, a number of such high-profile crimes could not go unnoticed. The press began publishing articles about the elusive John Dillinger almost every day, especially since he had his own specific style. For example, we can highlight the fact that during robberies John effectively jumped over bank fences 2 meters high, like his favorite actor Douglas Fairbanks, whom he constantly imitated. Many also liked the statements of John Dillinger. He often joked that he couldn't walk past a bank without clearing it. In general, thanks to the efforts of journalists, John began to transform from a common criminal into a folk hero. Sometime after escaping from prison, Dillinger and his gang made several raids on police stations, adding to their already rich arsenal of weapons. Then they robbed more and more banks. Until we found ourselves in East Chicago. There they transferred the stolen money, and at that moment a patrol policeman noticed them. He immediately identified Dillinger and attempted to make an arrest. At that moment, John pulled out a gun and said, "You asked for it." After which a shootout began. The patrolman managed to shoot 4 times, but missed, but the raider only needed 1 accurate shot. As far as we know, this was the first murder that John Dillinger committed. After the incident, the gang of raiders continued to travel around the country, carousing and robbing banks. Word of such a dangerous group reached the president himself, who at that time was Theodore Roosevelt. He spoke to the American people and promised to end crime, and declared Dillinger himself enemy number 1. A few months later, John and his accomplices stayed at the Congress Hotel. While they were there, for unknown reasons, a fire started in the building. The raiders were able to leave their new hideout in time, but the stolen money remained in the room. That is why they bribed one of the firefighters, and he, in turn, pulled money and weapons out of the fire. But another firefighter from the same brigade identified the bandits and immediately told the police about it. The security forces immediately went to the specified address and were able to detain not only Dillinger himself, but also all his accomplices. What happened next can be called truly amazing. Within a few days, John was sent to Indiana by plane, although all prisoners at that time were transported to their destination only by train. By the way, it is worth noting that John was the first criminal in U.S. history to be transported by plane. Immediately upon Dillinger's arrival, he was met by hundreds of police officers in dozens of cars and thousands of people who wanted to see their so-called idol in person. Here's another interesting fact. Sheriff Holly, part-time manager of the Crown Point prison, boasted to reporters and said that now Dillinger could not escape, because there were 8 closed doors between him and freedom, as well as a whole battalion of police officers. But looking ahead to the period, it is worth noting that she has never been so wrong. In addition, the legendary photograph was taken in Sheriff Holly's office, where John hugs his accuser, whose last name is Estelle, and smiles. It was this photograph that ruined Estelle's future career, because after President Roosevelt saw it, he simply became furious. A little later, they wanted to transfer the famous robber to a more reliable prison, but the local judge refused to sign the permission, so John Dillinger remained in Crown Point. Time passed and the tension gradually subsided, and the number of guards allocated specifically for John decreased. He, in turn, decided to take advantage of the situation and made a mock-up of a pistol out of wood, and to make it look more realistic, he covered it with black shoe polish. On March 3 at 8 in the morning, Dillinger pointed a dummy pistol at a security guard and forced him to open the arsenal. There he acquired weapons, and then freed another prisoner to help him escape. Using the captured guard as a human shield, the fugitives were able to leave the prison buildings through the service garage, which, by the way, was not closed. Then they calmly walked several blocks, found a suitable car and left the city. The only one who was able to notice John Dillinger's escape was a postman named Robert Long. He immediately called the police department and said that he saw John Dillinger leave the prison building and drive away, but unfortunately no one believed him. Then he went to the criminal court building, but again, everyone just laughed at the poor postman. In the end, he had to break through to the prison administration, and then they were able to understand what really happened. Dillinger's latest escape brought state power to the Red Line. From that moment on, not only the police, but also the FBI were hunting for the dangerous robber. J. Edgar Hoover, head of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, ordered the formation of a special squad, which was headed by a famous agent named Melvin Purvis. It is also worth mentioning that this news did not affect John in any way. He gathered a new gang and began robbing banks with renewed vigor. Road checks, as well as constant raids, could not stop Dillinger and his accomplices. This was the case until John returned to Saint Point. He rented an apartment there, but neighbors managed to identify him and called the police. Upon the arrival of the security forces, a shootout began. Dillinger was wounded, but still managed to escape. In this state, he could no longer engage in robberies and decided to return home to his father, Dillinger Sr. He, in turn, not only hid his son, but even wrote down a message for the country and the president. In it, he tried to exonerate his son and argued that most of what John was accused of was lies. He also asked to give his son a second chance and insisted that he would definitely improve. For some time, John healed early and came to his senses, after which, in a city called Warsaw, Indiana, he and his accomplice robbed a police station and armed themselves again. The newly formed gang had grandiose plans, but before starting to implement them, the raiders decided to go to a small resort in Wisconsin. There they met girls and relaxed to the fullest. Naturally, the owner of the resort identified the bandits and naturally informed the police. Another raid, shootout, and Dillinger escapes with his companions in an unknown direction. All that the agents and police were able to do was seize some of the weapons, as well as arrest the girls who were vacationing with the criminals. 8 days after his 31st birthday, Dillinger made his final raid on the bank. He wanted to steal such a sum to ensure a comfortable existence for himself until his death, but this was not destined to happen. There were only $24,000 in the bank at the time of the raid. Obviously this wasn't enough, so John decided to pull off another heist in Chicago a few weeks later. To have fun, he got involved with a prostitute named Anna Sage. Although Dillinger introduced himself to her with a fictitious name, she was able to identify him as the same hijacker whom the entire police force in the country was looking for. The girl entered into a deal with the FBI on the following terms. The authorities will allow her husband and children to stay in the country, and in return, she will help them find John Dillinger, and she still kept her part of the agreement. Anna told where and when they could catch John off guard. On the evening of July 22, 1934, police tracked down a robber and ambushed him near a movie theater Dillinger was scheduled to visit. At the end of the film, he left the theater where the FBI agent ordered him to surrender. Dillinger pulled out a weapon and tried to shoot one of the agents, but was wounded 3 times. A bullet wound to the face turned out to be fatal. Johnny Dillinger's dead body lay on the pavement for another hour before the car took him away. The police had to fire shots into the air to disperse the crowd of people who had gathered around the body of the famous robber. It is worth mentioning that after the liquidation of Dillinger, Anna Sage was deported back to Romania, because the FBI agent never fulfilled their part of the deal. This is how the life of the greatest raider named John Dillinger ended. He was buried in his native Indianapolis, but even after his death he remained very popular among Americans. This is evidenced by the fact that his tombstone had to be changed more than once, as his fans stuffed pieces of granite into the tombstone to take them as a souvenir. Also, John Dillinger was very fond of cars. Most of all he liked Ford cars. Once he even wrote a letter to Henry Ford, where he thanked him for creating a wonderful car, in which he repeatedly escaped police chases. By the way, the Ford that Dillinger drove was sold for $165,000.